And now we're on Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis, and we're talking about the mitzvah of a kiddush, to liftach rishon. And here we get into the laws of Kriyas HaTorah, that the Kohen should be called upon to read the Torah first. The Ran and the Rosh point out that this goes way beyond Kriyas HaTorah, but rather he's Rishon HaMedabrim v'Darshanim. In other words, if there are people who are going to darshan at a Sheva Brachas, at a Simcha, then he, the Kohen, goes first Levarach Rishon, and of course, in Zimun, for Birkas HaMazon, he comes first, B'lit Almani Yafa Rishon. If they're dividing up a port into segments, the portions, and there are better portions and not so great portions, the Kohen gets the better portion. HaKohen Yivcha Rishon Eza Chelik Sheyirtze. That's even more of a chidush, says the Ran, that he gets to choose which he wants, and therefore Kishiyoshin Besuda, when they're sitting at a meal, Yaviu Birushona Mana Yafal Kohen, which makes sure they bring the best portion to the Kohen first. However, there are those poskim who say that since it says the Chol Davar Shebekidusha, it doesn't apply to every single Seudah, but it only applies to a Seudas mitzvah. Now, in case of Meiser Sheni or Tzedakah, in the case where the Kohen is an Ani, then Tosfos interprets here in Gittin Daf the test that we give the Kohen first. That's also part of the Kiddush. Amar Rav, Shoyle Tzuri Rabbanu L'Meir Lo Yehivna Akarga. A Talmid Chacham is permitted, and again, when we talk about a Talmid Chacham, we're talking about Toraso Umnaso. And therefore, since he doesn't have a steady income, he's not working, and he has no wages, then he's going to say, and he's allowed to say, I don't want to pay my taxes. Somebody who has an income, he has to divvy off from the income to pay taxes, municipal taxes and other taxes. But here he's allowed to say, I'm not going to pay taxes, and we cannot obligate him to pay because he's a Tzurbi Rabbanon. He's Toraso Naso. And this halacha we're going to learn from a pasuk in Ezra when Korash HaMelech, who's the king of Paras, commands his avodim not to take any and collect any taxes from the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. The Tziv, as the pasuk says, Minda Velo Ve'Haloch Lo Shalit Lemirma Alein. Okay, so we have here three things. We have Minda, Below, and Halach, and the Memshala has no right to collect taxes from these three. Amar Rav Yehuda, who are these three? What kind of collections are we dealing with? I was saying the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah were exempt from paying these various taxes called Minda, Below, and Halach. Minda Zu Minas HaMelech. This was a set tax that the king would collect from karkos. He would take a certain percentage of the karka. And according to the Rosh of the Mukhi Yosef, it was 10% of the karka. Below, Zu Kesef Gulgalta. This was a tax that was per capita. Every person in the Bnei HaMedina had to pay a certain set tax. According to the Netziv, the word below comes from the word rush in Aramaic. So it's a head tax. He doesn't tell you exactly how much money it was. I guess it changed from time to time. Allah, so Arnona is interpreted as Seudas HaMelech. Now, when the king went from place to place, every city where he passed was obligated to prepare banquets on behalf of the Melech. But the Talmid Chacham is Patur, and therefore he's allowed to identify himself as a Talmid Chacham and say, I'm Patur from Nisim. Because otherwise, they're going to come and take away and confiscate his possessions, his money. And he's Patur, and this was based on the Mitzvah Melech that Koresh said he was Patur. The Yomar Rava, another situation, says Rava, in which the Chacham is Patur from Mas, and he could identify himself as such. Now, what does this mean? Avda de Nurano. And therefore, Yaviv's not Kraga, therefore I don't have to pay the taxes. So we'll start with the Ran. The Ran says, Eved ani l'karnai of the Avazar shayu ovdim li'esh. Pelaploim. I never understood this Gemara. How could it be that a Tzumi Rabbanon will identify himself as a Kohen who's serving the Ovdei Avodah Zarah that worship the fire? And therefore he says, I don't have to pay, by virtue of the decree of the king, I don't have to pay Misu. And what a great Chil Hashem, that Talmud Chacham would say that I serve as a Shamish, for the Ovdei Avodah Zarah that worship the Eish. So the Gemara itself is bothered by this question. Why isn't this considered nireh kemodeh b'avodah zarah? Like Tainul Avruche Aryeh Binei Ka'omar. Everybody understands that he's not saying it because Chas v'Shalom is modeh the avodah zarah, but rather he's only saying it in order to get away from paying taxes. Again, there's a lot of literature on this in terms of what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say in order to save yourself from tax. Rav Ashi Havileahu Ava. Now, Rav Ashi had Yar Eitzim. He had a forest of trees, Zavnei Lebeinura, and he sold it to the Avodah Zarah of Beis HaEsh, those who worship the fire, because they used to come and take away from this yard the trees and use them for the fire that was part of their Avodah Zarah worship. Omale Ravina Rav Ashi, Ravina objects to this behavior of Rav Ashi, who sold his eitzim to the Beis HaEsh. If they evil or siteg mikshol, the pasuk in Parashas Kedoshim says that you're not allowed to help someone, aid a person to violate the Torah law. And here, by giving them the eitzim, and they're going to burn these eitzim for the eish of Avodah Zarah. And when it comes to Avodah Zarah, it's one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Even a Nachri, a non-Jew, is enjoined from Avodah Zarah, and therefore if they evil or siteg mikshol. And the Achronim are medayik from this, that with the evil of siteg mikshol applies even to a guy, meaning even if you're being makshel a guy in one of his Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And that's a big chiddush, because we usually assume that with the Iver it has to do with Arvus, my responsibility, but here it has to do with the fact that his Avera now relates to you, because you set up that Avera. So how, asked Ravina, how are you, Rav Ashi, allowed to sell these eitzim for a sucker if they have Avodah Zarah? Malay, rov eitzim la sucker ninu. Most of the trees that they buy from me, they use to heat up their fireplaces, and not for the sake of Avodah Zarah. They cook on it, they heat up their houses, and therefore I'm going to assume that when they buy these trees, they're buying it for the robe. And therefore, the robe is not for Avodah Zarah, but rather for Hishtamshus of Hasaka, and there's no Isa to sell it to them. I mean, here you have to know a little bit more about robe, because usually Rabbi Meir, for example, says that we have to be Choshish for Miut. But I have a feeling that this robe is simply enough to remove the Isa of Lifnei Iver. Lifnei Iver only applies when I'm giving it to him for the purpose of his being Nichshal in an Avera. But once there's a robe, I have every right to assume he's not going to use it for the Avera. And therefore there's no Lifnei Iver. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Samach Beis Amid Beis. Now we're talking about a person who takes a konam and prohibits himself from drinking wine ad hakotzir, or ad hageshamim. And we have to know what is katsir, which katsir, and which geshamim. What did he have in mind? Ad hakatsir sheyaschil ha'am liktzar ktsir chitil avolo ktsir siorim. It seems that there are two different time periods for harvesting, one for barley and another one for wheat. And according to the Mefaresh here, Ktsir Siorim is Mukta Miktsir Chitin. So we have a kula here in potential if we assume that what he had in mind was Ktsir Siorim. And that would allow him to drink wine at an earlier date when the neder terminates. But the Mishnah says just the opposite is true. That Ktsir Chitim is chashuv b'einei ha'adam. And when a person uses the word Ktsir stam without an adjective, and he doesn't describe which specific Ktsir he has in mind, we assume that he has in mind the Ktsir with a hey ayidiyah, which is chashuv b'einei ha'adam, and that's the Ktsir Chitim. So he's going to have to observe the Isur of his neder all the way till Ktsir Chitim. However, now the Mishnah qualifies this. Hakol lefi makom nidra. It could be that in certain areas, certain locales, it's ragil for a person to use the word katzir, and without qualifying it, to refer to katzir siorim. And it could be that in those areas, most of the tvua that they grow was siorim. And therefore, his neder will terminate at the very earlier stage of the beginning of Ktsir Siorim. So it's not an absolute rule when we say Ktsir Chitim. And then the Mishnah gives us another analogy. Im Haya Bahar, if a man was standing on a mountaintop when he took his neder, and later on, he goes down into a ravine, into a bika, then the Isur of his neder will continue until you hit the Ktsir Bahar. So it could be the Ktsir Bahar is at a later date than the Ktsir of the bika, but nevertheless, we have to be machmir on it because when he took the neder, he was standing in a har. But im haya bibika, if at the time that he took his neder, he went down to the bika and then he took the neder, even though afterwards he went up to the har, then bibika. He doesn't have to wait until the later moment of the Ktsir Bahar, but rather already at the time of the Ktsir bibika, which is earlier, then he can already terminate his neder and he's allowed to drink wine. So again, we're assuming now that Ktsir Bika is Mukdam, comes earlier than Ktsir Bahar. Now a person takes a konam that he won't drink wine ad hageshamin, or ad sheyu geshamin. And the Mishnah says that in those cases, ad shetered revia shnia, until the geshamim start falling bitkufas hashenis, kufas hashenis. And that means that the noder had in mind what's called the revia mimutzas, not the earlier revia, not the later revia, but the middle revia, which is called kufas hashenis. And here we have a long discussion about the various kufos and what's revia. So, for example, the Rosh says that Revia Shnia is indicated by the fact that he says Gishamim. Gishamim means miut shnayim. Whenever you have a Rabbim, then the miut of Rabbim is always shnayim. So it must be the second rains, not the first rains at the beginning of the rainy season, but the second rains. And that's called Revia Shnia. And apparently the second rains are already the heavy rains, and they cause drachim u'usos u'mekukolos. They already disturb the traffic and the roads. And since he said Yeshamim, he indicates the second Yeshamim, because Ribui, Miut, Ribui Shnaim is Shnaim. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, no. We don't even have to wait until the rains come down. You were assuming that when he said Konam, Yayin, Shanitom, Anakshom, we have to wait till the Gshamim actually start falling from the heavens. No, says Rabbi Shimon. What he meant to say was, Achi Agias Manashal Rabbi Shnia. Why? Because if you recall, in the daf that we did yesterday, there was something called Zman Kavua and something called Ein Zman Kavua. With regard to Yeridas Geshamim, it's Ein Zman Kavua. And therefore, when it's Ein Zman Kavua, we interpret his intention to a certain beginning of a time period, but not to the actual Yerida. Because if it's Zman Kavua, you can talk about a Yerida. But if there's no Zman Kavua, then what is he? He's taking a neder on something that doesn't have a kitzvah, it doesn't have any sort of definite time period. And therefore, we're going to interpret his neder is Ad She'agil is Manashal Reveal, where, let's say we assume under normal meteorological conditions, that's when the rains start falling. But it doesn't matter one way or the other when the rains actually fell. And the Mishnah concludes by quoting a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about the following issue. A man takes a kodom shanitoim yayin ashi pasku agishamim until the rain stopped falling. When did the rain stop falling? So let's fast forward to Rabbi Yehuda, and then we'll go back to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda omer ashi yavra Pesach. In other words, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's a hemshech of Zman HaGeshamim until after Pesach. So let's say Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. We add another 7 days, and we're up to the 22nd of Nisan. Already at that point, it's a week before Iyar, before the next month, and he's already allowed to drink wine according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir disagrees. And his opinion is, Ad Sof Nisan, Ad Sheyetze Nisan Kulo. So we have to wait until Rosh Chodesh Iyar until he's allowed to drink his wine and his neder is terminated. And the Mefarshei Mishnah Taina that this is basically a reflection of Rabbi Meir's Shita in Masechet Tainis on Daf Hey. Shoalim ala geshamim v'tfilo. We continue asking for rains and davening. The same talamotul v'brocha ad sof Nisan, until the end of Nisan. And keep in mind that even though most of the rains will have fallen by the end of Pesach, but still there is some miut of rains that will fall after Pesach, and therefore it's not yet ad sheyifsugu gesham, because Rabbi is always the one who's choshesh l'miut. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Hano, there a person takes a neder konam yayin shanitoim anakayitz. And where is he standing? In what locale when he took the neder? First, Bagolil. Golil is full of mountains. It's very high. B'yared, after he took the neder, he went down from the high Golil la'amokim to the ravines below. The time of kates, of kites, comes earlier down in the amokim, because there's a lot more rain there and moisture and water. Nevertheless, also at shagia kates begolil. Why? Because the neder is nikva lefi makom shebo nodar. At the time of the neder, he was standing in the gol in the high points. And this we saw in our Mishnah with regard to Har and Bika, that the Ktsir Bika is Mukdam B'Ktsir Hahar, and yet he's going to have to delay and extend his neder until the har, because he was up on the har when he took the neder. Same thing here in Gold. The Mishnah says, "Aleg shoma shiu gishomim ad shetere revia shnia Rab Shimon Gamliel Omer zman revia shnia Omer Rab Zera machlokes." What's the machlokes here between the Chacham and Rab Shimon Gamliel? That's only the Omer ad hagishomim, and he used the word gishomim in the plural. And the Chachamim hold that there's a what's called a yitur lashon here. When he adds the geshamim in the plural, and he says ada geshamim, it means until the rains actually fall, so that the neder will be lechumra for an extended period of time, and that's the sheet of the Chachamim. Avolim Omar ad hageshem. If he only uses the word geshem and not geshamim, so there's no yitur lashon, then even the Chachamim concede to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel ad zman geshamim kamar, until the Revi'ah Shniya. We don't have to wait till the rains actually fall down, because there's no zman kavua for yiridas geshamim. So therefore, we're not going to wait for the rains to come down, but rather for the Zman Gishamim. And this again is a reflection, as we said earlier, the principle Ein Darko Shel Bnei Adam Lesar Es Al Atzman Below Kitzvah. So when did the Chachamim disagree? That's when he said Ada Gishamim. He was Mosif Bilashono. He added something. And why? He wanted to be Medagdi to Mildia, to make it clear that his intention was to prohibit himself until the Geshamim actually fall before. And this leads us to Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, which in Mirza Hashem we'll pick up tomorrow. Thank you very much and have a great day.